Today's video is going to be special for those of you who love dystopian societies, because in the world of anime and manga, it doesn't get more post-apocalyptic than Berserk and Fist of the North Star. These series have produced some of the most iconic moments in those industries, from Kenshiro's "Ome wa mo shenderu" to the infamous clanging of Dragonslayer from Berserk 2016. But one thing people have always wondered is how Guts and Kenshiro would do against each other in a straight-up one-on-one fight. So, in this video, we'll take a look at just that. We'll be discussing in depth how Guts versus Kenshiro might play out, if it ever happens, and the factors that would influence each man's victory. We're hyped up for this one, but before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. It's a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. So, without further ado, let's get straight to it. Unarmed combat. Guts versus Kenshiro. To do justice to this versus video, we need to establish the context within which each series is set. If you've ever come across our channel while surfing YouTube, then you already know a whole hell of a lot about the world of Berserk. It's a medieval dark fantasy series that falls under the sword and sorcery category. Our main protagonist is Guts, an expert swordsman who has spent his entire life on the battlefield. Guts' life takes a dark turn when the man he works for and idolizes, Griffith, sacrifices their comrades in exchange for quote-unquote divine power. From that day forward, he vowed to extinguish all demonkind, and over the next couple of years, he became the infamous Black Swordsman, a walking, talking arsenal of destruction. Kenshiro can be described in much the same way, but his primary weapons are his fists and feet. Fist of the North Star is set in a post-apocalyptic world where all natural resources have replaced gold and money as currency. Uncontaminated food and water mean life on this earth, and Mad Max probably took many of its thematic and aesthetic cues from this series. Through this wasteland walks Kenshiro, the 64th successor of the Hokuto Shinken school of martial arts. This is an ancient discipline that originated in China nearly 2,000 years ago, and in a world divided by resources and ruthless warlords, Kenshiro decides to use his gifts to protect the weak and innocent. Throughout his journey, he fights several gifted martial artists from rival schools, and even his own school of martial arts, one of whom turns out to be his brother. And, before we forget, Kenshiro's primary motivation at the start of the series was to find and protect his kidnapped lover, Yuria. So there are many similarities between Guts and Kenshiro's personalities and lives, but the big difference between them is what matters here. Guts and Kenshiro use completely different weapons to blaze their path through their enemies' ranks. Where Guts is an expert swordsman who's been honing his skill with swords bigger than him since he was 6, Kenshiro is the successor of one of the deadliest assassination techniques in the world. The Hokuto Shinken school of martial arts has also been labeled an Ansatsuken, aka assassination-style martial arts. It focuses on targeting the 708 meridian channels within the human body with the aim of exploding it from within. It teaches the user to focus their energy into their striking extremities and hitting their targets with such force that it collapses their internal physiology. Kenshiro is such an expert in this technique that he's been designated the official 64th successor to it, and he's rumored to be the best practitioner of Hokuto Shinken ever. He can adjust the amount of force he uses to actually heal certain injuries, because at the end of the day, things like dislocation and nerve tension can be relieved with just the right pressure. But what this means is that Kenshiro is an expert unarmed combatant, and Guts, at best, is a decent brawler. Hand-to-hand combat is not something Guts usually goes for. That's not because he isn't strong. I mean, look at the guy. He's chiseled like a Greek sculpture. In terms of physique, we'd say he and Kenshiro are at about the same level. But the difference lies in the technique, and Kenshiro is just far more experienced in unarmed combat. Guts once had his arm dislocated mid-fight by Griffith, and while he might have been able to go toe-to-toe with Kenshiro before he got the Berserker Armor, now he might not stand a chance. The armor has sucked the life out of him. He looks malnourished because it's literally feeding off of him, so let's assume that Guts is at his peak physical strength and not using any of his weapons. We'll even give him his right eye back and assume that he has his left metal arm on for extra protection because, honestly, he's going to need it. One of Kenshiro's signature techniques is the Hyakuretsu Ken, aka the 100 Rending Fist. He unleashes a flurry of 100 concentrated strikes that manage to make all 708 meridian points blow up, causing a person to literally explode. Kenshiro once broke a friggin' tank with this move, so trying to fight him unarmed is just a death sentence for Guts. Guts is a brawler. He's good at throwing slugs, but we don't think he's ever worked on his martial arts technique. His metal arm might give him some protection from Kenshiro's fists, but that is assuming he's fast enough to raise it in time. Kenshiro has killed people by jabbing fingers into foreheads, so Guts needs to be really careful about every move he makes. Now, Guts is fast, and he has insane stamina and endurance. He was riddled by arrows and sword wounds and still survived an entire night, fighting off 100 knights by himself. This was before he became the Black Swordsman, when he would leap at armies willingly and cut a bloody path through them. Guts has insane reflexes. He once stopped Salat's chakram, a weapon he was unfamiliar with, by tracing its trajectory and then thrusting his finger into its opening at just the right time. His physical senses are completely on point, but in unarmed combat, he's much better off using it to run away. His superior battle intelligence will tell him sooner or later that Kenshiro just has an instinctive knowledge of the human anatomy and how to tear it apart with his bare hands. Subterfuge is his best chance at getting a clean hit in, and even then, it's shaky whether Guts will be able to defeat him or not. So, in a pure hand-to-hand fight, Kenshiro has the upper hand without a shadow of a doubt. Now, let's see what happens when we give Guts some weapons. Fighting with regular arms. Weapons expert versus martial arts expert. In this scenario, Guts has most of his equipment from his days as the Black Swordsman, minus Dragonslayer. Instead, he uses his sword from the Golden Age, which is still a pretty formidable weapon. It's a traditional greatsword, about as long as Guts, and it's heavy. It works more like a mace than a traditional slashing weapon because the impact itself is enough to knock people off balance. But it does have an edge, so when Guts uses it, he's able to slash into armored men like they're straw dolls. To add to that, he also has his throwing knives, his metal arm, his rapid-fire crossbow, and his mini bombs at his disposal, and also his dagger, and his Godot-forged armor, which, to be fair, could end up working against him. How, you ask? Well, Kenshiro blew up a tank with his bare hands. He might punch Guts' breastplate through him if he gets into the groove, but Godot's marksmanship has withstood attacks from some of the most dangerous apostles in the series, so we won't say anything that will happen immediately. Using these weapons, Guts can create enough openings for himself to start turning the tide of the battle. The throwing knives and the rapid-fire crossbow might not be that helpful, considering we've seen Kenshiro stop and send back a hailstorm of arrows by catching and throwing hundreds of the damned things. But Guts' crossbow is about as mechanized as a weapon can be in the medieval era, and he doesn't need to stay in one place to aim or reload with every shot. He can mount the pressure on Kenshiro using his projectiles, which include his mini bombs, and while these aren't powerful enough to fully kill Kenshiro, they will serve as a great distraction and deal minor damage to him that Guts can later exploit with his sword. That is, of course, if Kenshiro doesn't catch the bomb and throw it back in his face. His dagger will only come into play in a close-quarters situation, and considering his specialty is martial arts, Guts will want to create as much space as is humanly possible to avoid getting killed in the most embarrassing way. His greatsword is a decent weapon to accomplish this because its length will ensure Kenshiro stays at least an arm's length away from Guts. Greatswords were created with the purpose of defending a large area, so Guts creating an impenetrable defense with his isn't out of the question. What is questionable is how long will his old blade hold up against Kenshiro's strikes. Guts is a monster when it comes to swordplay. When he fought Zod the first time in his life, he took up a stance that impressed even the immortal because he knew that Guts was all business. He can cut through massive wooden logs falling off a waterfall at his peak performance, and that's really just the beginning. At 15, Guts cut through the battle axe of a warrior 5 times his size by using his body's momentum against him. He's a genius swordsman, and his blade is pretty much a part of his body. Unarmed, he's just a bar brawler, but with a sword, he's a master of combat. Guts uses the blade like Kenshiro uses his limbs, but the question is not whether he can keep the martial artist at bay, it's whether he can defeat him. His swordsmanship is more or less on par with Kenshiro's martial arts skills, so Guts can at least fight him on a more even footing, but his equipment will need to be in top condition for this, and even then, there's no guarantee it won't simply break under the force of Kenshiro's strikes. Guts' greatsword broke in one of his most pivotal battles after all. During the Battle for Doldry, Guts engaged the Tudor general Boss Khan in single combat, and they were both evenly matched in terms of skill. But Guts' equipment was banged up from his 100-man slaying, so Boss Khan's well-maintained poleaxe was able to snap it in half and kill his sword. Guts avenged his fallen blade by picking up a massive war cleaver that showed up on the battlefield courtesy of Zod, but this is a habit with Guts. He rarely thinks about weapon upkeep in that when his swords become useless, he just finds another one. He just doesn't do the regular maintenance that's needed to keep a sword sharp and solid. And Kenshiro's fists can break through even the hardiest of regular blades, to be honest with you. Also, Kenshiro is a weapons expert too, so if we keep assuming that he's just going to fight Guts unarmed, that's a little unrealistic. If he brings in weapons of his own, Guts will have a tough time dealing with him, but that likely won't be the case if he uses his signature weapons as well. Full Gear Battle: Berserker Guts with Dragonslayer versus Kenshiro's Hokuto Shinken. The two things that can sway the battle in Guts' favor are his signature sword and set of armor. The Dragonslayer is, simply put, the pinnacle of craftsmanship. A massive hunk of steel that's been forged so thick that it can stop cannon fire if Guts chose to use it for that. Dragonslayer is so well proportioned that Guts doesn't need a shield because of it. It pretty much covers his entire body. And when you combine it with the Berserker Armor, Kenshiro gets backed into a fatal corner. If Guts just used Dragonslayer, he could level the playing ground entirely. We've seen his use of it so many times across the manga. He's the most economic and efficient fighter in that he doesn't even draw Dragonslayer until he absolutely needs to. He just maneuvers it however he needs it to move to protect himself from arrows, death stingers, balls of flame, and pretty much anything else his enemies can throw at him. Dragonslayer is so well made that even after 2 years of non-stop and excessive usage, it was barely in bad shape, despite Godot describing it as having aged 10 years. Dragonslayer's core steel never went bad, and we're pretty sure that Guts could have kept fighting with it for a couple more years before it actually cracked. With Dragonslayer, he'll be able to defend against Kenshiro just fine, and with the Berserker Armor, he won't even need to think about that. The Berserker Armor is the ultimate protection against a force like Kenshiro's Hokuto Shinken. It's durable enough to withstand blows from the corundum skin dragon Grunbeld, and can only be pierced by the biting force of a Makata, a creature that's a cross between a whale and an elephant with their combined strength. Even if Kenshiro is able to break down Guts' pressure points by striking them precisely, the armor will simply repair the damage by sending steel spikes through his body because its primary purpose is to keep its user fighting at all costs. The Berserker Armor has made Guts go through some of the worst pain of his life, but it's also been the source of some of his most impressive feats. When Guts broke his arm and leg trying to block a shot from Grunbeld's tail, the armor fixed it immediately, and he went right back to swirling through the air and crash landing on the Flame Dragon Apostle with Dragonslayer in both hands. Guts' offensive power goes off the charts as the Berserker because in this state, he isn't thinking about technique or area coverage or anything. The armor augments his physical abilities to superhuman levels, so all Guts is looking for is the most effective and brutal way to kill his enemies. Every move he makes is so that he can gain enough momentum to become an unstoppable arc of death. While he wields Dragonslayer impressively enough without the armor, his use of it becomes downright terrifying as the Berserker because he treats it like a regular sword. Dragonslayer is so heavy that Godot was shocked Guts could lift it in the first place, let alone kill an apostle with it, and the Berserker Armor would keep Guts on the offensive until he dies, unless he has a magic user with him to stabilize his mind. That probably wouldn't be a good idea though, because Kenshiro isn't the kind of enemy you want to go against with a clear mind. He's one of the rare individuals where the feral unpredictability of the Berserker Armor is an asset, because he might just be a martial artist, but he is the greatest in the world. All Kenshiro needs is an opening, and Guts' controlled Berserker state gives him 3 of those: his eyes and his mouth. Getting through his defense will be extremely difficult, but if he can manage it, then Kenshiro needs to use the strongest finger punch of his entire life to kill Guts. If he doesn't, the Berserker Armor will restart his heart and keep him going. Kenshiro could try to prolong the fight until Guts bleeds out because of the armor's side effects, but that strategy would only work if he had a supersonic jet or something. Berserker Guts' leaping ability alone can match up to Kenshiro's top speed, and even 1,000 fists to his body won't blow him up the same way he might expect. If the Berserker Armor weren't involved in this fight, we'd say it's about 50-50. Guts' skill with the sword is as good as Kenshiro's martial arts game, and it just becomes a matter of who outwits who. Guts might seem like an oaf off the battlefield, but on it, he's Albert friggin' Einstein. He's lived on battlefields since he was a child, and he knows pretty much everything there is to know about strategy and battle psychology. Now, it's a different thing altogether that he often ignores the former, but we're pretty sure that if you put Guts in charge of a siege defense, he'd do just as good a job of it as Griffith did during his introduction in the Golden Age arc. Kenshiro, for his part, lives and breathes the way of the Northern Fist, so his life, like Guts's, is also battle-oriented. Where things become unfair is with the introduction of artifacts, because no matter what artifact Kenshiro uses against Guts from his universe, all of it would be useless in the face of the Berserker Armor. That thing is specifically designed to keep its user fighting until the last drop of blood has been spilt from their body, and it's pretty hard to break through as a bonus. With the Berserker Armor on and in full Berserk mode, Guts might just defeat Kenshiro, but in doing so, he risks bleeding to death himself. Without the armor, it's anybody's guess, although because we've been covering Berserk for so long, we're going to be a little biased towards Guts. So maybe, with his years of expertise as a swordsman, Guts is able to sneak out a victory from Kenshiro, but it'll be an extremely close fight without the Berserker Armor, and not even a question without Dragonslayer. Marvelous verdict! But that's just our opinion, now we want to hear yours. Who do you think would win in a fight between Guts and Kenshiro, and more importantly, why? Let us know in the comments section down below, and don't forget to subscribe for more marvelous anime content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, but otherwise, we'll see you guys in the next one. So until then, stay safe and don't forget to keep on struggling, strugglers.